Hello, great souls. Welcome to our Satsang talk reflection on Autobiography of a Yogi. Let's begin together with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow to you all. Guide us this day to dive deeply into these teachings of Autobiography of a Yogi. Help us to find the gems that are here for us, to apply them with wisdom to our journey, to utilize these gifts to awaken to our own divine nature and to align our consciousness with divine consciousness, to be a blessing of light to all. Om, peace, amen. Okay, so today we're looking at chapter 16, Outwitting the Stars. And as with many of the chapters, as I was going through it, I just found that it was quite full and quite rich. So my sense is probably we'll go through the first part of the chapter today, which is focused primarily on astrology, hence the title, Outwitting the Stars. And then next time we'll look at Sri Yukteswar's teachings on the Bible. It's very interesting, some questions that Yogananda asked and how they apply to Yogananda's mission, looking at the teachings of the Gita and the teachings of the Bible, what he called original yoga and original Christianity, and his mission to teach the underlying reality of all true paths. So this was a cornerstone of his mission. So the first part of the chapter begins with Sri Yukteswar saying to Yogananda, when his name was still Mukunda, Mukunda, why don't you get an astrological armlet? Should I, master? I don't believe in astrology. And Sri Yukteswar's response to that is, it is never a question of belief. The only scientific attitude one can take on any subject is whether it is true. The law of gravitation worked as efficiently before Newton as after him. The cosmos would be fairly chaotic if its laws could not operate without the sanction of human belief. I appreciate Sri Yukteswar's wit, his humor there, to say that there are laws that are in operation, whether we're aware of those laws or whether we believe those laws. And so then Sri Yukteswar goes on to talk about astrology. And here when we're talking about astrology, he's talking about what's known as Vedic astrology, which is sometimes Indian, from India. It's an ancient looking at the stars and the planets from a perspective. Swami Kriyananda distinguished what he called Western astrology from Vedic astrology. So in the United States in particular, people tend to be much more familiar with Western astrology, and that's the same signs of the horoscope and the attributes of those signs. There are similarities to that, both in Western astrology and Vedic astrology, but the purpose is a little bit different. So I'll share that with you today. These are master's teachings as Swami Kriyananda clarified them, as well as how they're stated in Autobiography of a Yogi. So first let me distinguish the difference between Western astrology and Vedic astrology. What Swami Kriyananda said is that and he wrote a lovely book on this called Your Sun Sign. trying to think if there's another title. I feel like it's something your sun sign. But if you search Swami Kriyananda, certainly if you go to Crystal Clarity Publishers and ask about, with his name as the author, your sun sign, I think it's your, I apologize, I don't remember in this moment. I might try to have that for us next week. So what he says in this book, and it is really a lovely book, that in Western astrology, primarily the focus is on the personality. So if I'm born a Pisces, let's say in Western astrology, whatever your sign might be, my personality would have a lot of those characteristics. That would be my sun sign. That would be the sign that my soul came in and is utilizing the personality, this particular incarnation and the events of this incarnation for growth and for awakening. So if I look at the traits of my sun sign to understand myself, there is a truth in that. There will be, and that's kind of, for myself, I will say, I remember this as a child, some of the fun, and as a teenager, some of the fun of a horoscope is that there are traits that seem true. You read it and you look at it and you can see it in yourself or see it in friends and loved ones, that those traits, they do seem to line up with the person. So what Swami Kriyananda said is it's true. We do have these particular traits, and awareness of those traits can help us to balance ourselves, right? Can help us work with our natural inclination towards things. It can help us draw upon our strengths, those things that are naturally part of our personality, and be sensitive and aware to our limitations, right? What might be, what might challenge us because of that. So I'm thinking in this moment of, with Pisces, I was actually born Pisces, that is my sun sign. And as it turns out, it's also Vedic astrology, which isn't always the case. And I'll explain a little bit about that, how that can be different. And my husband is Taurus, so he is the bull, right? Earth sign, so water sign and earth sign. And we actually complement each other very well, but we are quite different. So what we'll say, one of the ways we describe our relationship is that we're harmonious. We're very harmonious in our partnership, but very, very different. And it's just true. It's just our personalities are different, our natural inclinations are different. And fortunately, it works out in a harmonious way. And we laugh about our differences at times, but we just know each other and we know ourselves. So there can be value to understanding your sun sign and working with it. And again, Swami talks about this in his book and gives guidelines for that, as well as working with other people, appreciating differences, just recognizing we really are different, and it's beneficial to acknowledge that and honor that. One of the ways that he describes maturity is the expansion of sensitivity for the reality of others. So I've always appreciated that definition of spiritual maturity in particular is manifested through emotional maturity, the ability to appreciate and have sensitivity for the reality of others. So when we're looking at astrology, that can be very, very helpful to recognize that. Oh, what's that person's perspective? What's their natural inclination? How can I support that and work with that? So with Vedic astrology, the difference with Vedic astrology, there's a timeline difference that I'm aware of. I will say that astrology I have enough information about it from a yoga perspective that I'll share with you today. I'm not an astrologer, and I'm not by any means an expert in astrology. And one of the things that Sri Yukteswar talks about in Autobiography, one of the things he's saying to Yogananda, that Yogananda highlights here, is that really it takes wisdom and intuition in order to work with this science. So Vedic astrology, it is a science. It's an ancient science, It's mathematical. And so Sri Yukteswar is saying, to utilize that can be of great benefit for us. So it's quite vast. My exposure to it, I've worked with, over the years, a few astrologers through Ananda that are very, very gifted. So Drupada, and Drupada lived at the Ananda village. I'm not sure where he's living right now. He might be there. I think he's there part of the time, and then somewhere else. I'm not sure where else he is. But he has had students, amazing students, who've studied with him for years, and they're also astrologers themselves. Keshava, who lives in our community here, I've heard wonderful things about him as an astrologer. Asha was telling me the other day that Keshava lives also at Chela Bhavan, and she said it's lovely to have an astrologer in the home that she can ask, what's happening with the planets right now? And often he can say things that are very illuminating. Oh, that makes sense. Why something would actually feel more difficult, more challenging, or when it's a very good time to do something. So that's part of what Vedic astrology is looking at, is what is happening with the planets, what's going on, and how might we utilize that information to work more harmoniously in our life and in our journey. I will say this, and Yogananda touches upon it a few times, that what Sri Yukteswar was saying to him, because Yogananda said he never really, first off, he didn't really believe in astrology, and he didn't give it much credit. But what Sri Yukteswar was saying is, in essence, don't blame the science on those who don't know how to practice it. So those who are superstitious in their practice, they're not really intuitive, and they don't really bring wisdom to the science. Don't base the science on that. Those who are true astrologers, who really do have a knowledge about it, a wisdom and intuition with it, that's a very different thing. And their approach is not superstitious. Part of what their approach is, I'll go back to the term mathematical, they're looking at energy, they're looking at the composite of the planets, of what is the energy of those planets, what's the placement of those, and what might you expect in your journey, given your birth chart, given how the stars lined up when you incarnated. So what Yogananda says in this chapter is that each of us, this is a yogic teaching, each of us, it is our own karma that determines when we are born, exactly the time, exactly the place, exactly the body, exactly the family, exactly the life conditions, that our soul and our past karma, meaning our previous actions, have determined that which will manifest today, right? And that which will manifest at the time of our birth. So what the chart sets out for one who knows how to read it are the lessons, the soul lessons for this lifetime. And that's, again, a little bit different of Vedic astrology. So Western would say, here's your personality, here's what you're like, here's what you might resonate with or not resonate with. True, right? True, valid. And Vedic astrology would say, here's why you're here. Here's why your soul came. Here are the life lessons that will present themselves to you. And again, as an adult in particular, I was speaking with a friend recently who'd had a reading, and she had a reading with Keshava, and she was saying how miraculous it was to be talking to someone who doesn't know her at all, and he could be pinpointing the challenges that are part of her chart as her soul journey, very specific, that were true. And she said, it makes a believer out of you when someone is able to do that. And I remember James and I, a number of years ago now, was our first astrological reading. I think I've had two. I guess I've had two over many years. So that's just where I was at with it. I did find both times they were helpful. And Drupada, James and I had a reading together, so he was talking about, and we're actually very close in age, in biological age. I was born in March, he was born in May of the same year. So there are certain planetary realities that are true for both of us at the same time, which is whatever it is. If for those who understand astrology, when Saturn is returning, if you that's considered, Saturn is a planet that can be a difficult planet. The way Drupada described it to us is that he said Saturn is like Sri Yukteswar, where it's a corrective planet. So what it will do is anything in your life that's not in alignment with your soul purpose will become more obvious, generally through difficulty, right? So whereas when Saturn's not on return, you might be able to be slightly off course in your soul's purpose and your soul's journey. It's not so bad. You can, we tend to be able to, so many of us can be, can do that, right? But when Saturn is returning, it doesn't feel like that. It's harder. It's a gift, because that's the point of it, is that karma is also, from yogic teaching, it's a gift. It's here to help us learn our lessons. Yogananda described, in terms of the soul, so when I'm talking about soul, he said that the ego is an aspect of our soul. It's not separate from the soul. But the ego is the aspect of the soul that identifies with the material realm and the physical body and the personality. So the ego would think that I am my sun sign, right? So if I'm a Pisces, the ego would feel that that's my whole identity, right? In my physical body, my whole identity, the specific reality of my journey, well, that's my whole identity. But in yogic teaching, that is not my identity. That is an experience, my highest, fullest self, which is at one with the universe and at one with a perfect reflection of the divine. This is true for all of us. So when Yogananda, or when I speak of soul and ego, it just gets a little bit easier to use those two terms, but it is important to know they're not separate from one another. So that's why sometimes we'll say our highest self. It's really about consciousness. Self-realization is the remembering. Smriti is called divine memory. It's the memory of who we are. So the ego's journey, in terms of our soul purpose, is to merge completely with our soul identity, and to understand, to realize that the body I'm in is not my whole reality, that the physical incarnation I'm journeying through, these experiences are real and they do impact me, but they don't define me. And that's the path of freedom that yoga offers. And something that Sri Yukteswar says to Yogananda about working with astrology. That's why we don't want to be superstitious about it. You don't want to feel like the planets dominate my life. And that can happen in the practice, right? If someone can become fearful, right? They need to read the planets to feel like they'll be okay in the day. And that would be, from Sri Yukteswar's perspective, or Yogananda's perspective, an over-reliance on the science of astrology rather than a tool. But it is in fact a tool that can be very helpful to know. So when we're thinking about standing in our highest truth, our highest self, the practice in yoga is to align with that ultimate divine energy. And we have an affirmation in our yoga postures, Natarajasana, dancing Shiva. Shiva is the destroyer of delusion. So the affirmation is, while I move through life, I remain anchored in my highest self. While I move through life, I remain anchored in my highest self. So that anchorage point is a point of, in yoga practice, we are literally practicing that awareness. I may not feel it, which is okay. That can be true. The ego can dominate sometimes, where you'll just feel like you are your body. An example of that would be the body's not feeling well, and I feel unwell. part of our yoga practice is to say, my body is having a hard time today. I'm not having a hard time today. My body's having a hard time today. It can affect my mood. It can affect my thoughts. It can affect that, but it can't affect me. That's the teaching of yoga. So even if I'm not feeling the truth of it, I practice the truth of it. Because as Sri Yukteswar would say, the truth isn't dependent upon my belief in it. That being said, the affirmation itself can awaken me. So I practice truth because truth has power, and over time, it's a doorway that will awaken the ego. The ego will realize through our journey, especially when we're conscious about it, more and more this deeper reality, and we touch it, right? We read Autobiography, we listen to talks, we share with friends who are also spiritual seekers, and we have our points of light, of awakening, where we feel within ourselves a deeper truth. We recognize, I am more than this physical body. There's a piece within me that's untouched by the outer reality. So if we bring that awareness to the practice of astrology, we can utilize those tools. We can recommit ourselves to our soul's purpose. We can even understand our soul's purpose a little more deeply. I remember in the second reading that I had, the astrologer was helping me to, and he trained with Drupada, and he was helping me to understand that a refinement in terms of service, of seva. He was saying, looking at my chart, I had a lot of, it was a lot of history, a lot of lifetimes is what he said, of service and seva. So that was there. So then he was saying, so in looking at the chart, what would be different about this lifetime? So I would be naturally drawn to service, and seva would be natural for me because I have done it. And that's true. That was absolutely true. And it is part of our yoga practice and path. But the difference for me, what he was saying, is in past lifetimes, my service would have been more about establishing things. And establishing things is probably the best way to say it. So the service would have an outer manifestation. It could be organizations, it could be all kinds of things, it could be programs, but it would be a clear outer manifestation of that service. Whereas in this life, the part of the soul journey is more about attunement with divine will. And that may not manifest outwardly as something so clearly as that I can look at and say, oh, see how whatever I did manifested, there was a sense of completion around it. A sense of completion is the best way to say it. And he said, in fact, because my own soul is needing freedom from an identification with whatever service I've done. Right? So he said, in this lifetime, probably some things I've given energy to and set out to do, they don't manifest, right? To help me, right? To help me see it doesn't matter. That's not why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it for it to manifest. It doesn't mean that nothing will manifest, but it is very interesting. I've talked in previous talks a little bit about my history with 12 steps, so with recovery and sobriety. And I learned in those, it's very interesting, and very early on in the path of practicing the 12 steps, which are built also upon spiritual principles, the importance of tuning into divine will. And rather than make something happen, make something manifest, it's more important to listen for divine guidance and act upon that. And that practice will bring about the highest results for all. So that principle, it was interesting to me. I got sober when I was 20, quite young. And when I was listening to this astrologer say to me, oh, this would be a soul purpose for you. It's very true. And it came early in my life, this teaching, don't just try to make something happen. Be discerning about what you do. That's another, so these are just some personal things that might help put it in perspective. But Vedic astrology works with the planets, and so in the book, Yogananda talked about a bangle, and very often you'll see people at Ananda wearing bangles. I have one as well, and this is a particular formula that Sri Yukteswar recommended. He actually, for Yogananda, gave him a slightly different formula, which Yogananda talks about. The bangles, you can purchase these. There are people, again, who study this and they make them. They know exactly the weight. It's very particular. I would give you that resource if I knew it off the top of my head, but I don't. So maybe next week I'll try and get the book and also where you can order a bangle if you're interested in doing that. What Sri Yukteswar said is that it can help to protect you from negative energy that's coming your way. And so, and there are some really wonderful, amazing stories about it. Both James and I purchased this from a man at Ananda Village who makes them. And he was telling us, he told me when I got the bangle, he said, you may find yourself feeling like taking it off. Don't. It's really interesting. Then I later had conversations with people. You actually have a whole relationship with it. It's true, energetically. It can be surprising which arm to wear it on, where to wear it on your arm. Yeah, very, very interesting. So I think I'm right-handed, so I started on the left side. It was not happy there. So I moved it over to the right, and it's happy on my right arm. So there you go. Okay, so we're just about out of time. Let me try to, what else can I offer you that Yogananda was saying today? Well, I think these key principles of work with astrology from a perspective of utilizing it as a tool to support you in your soul's journey. So if you're drawn, I would encourage you to seek out an astrologer who, since I'm speaking from Ananda, I will recommend someone from Ananda. So Keshava lives here in Palo Alto. Krishnadas, I think, is the astrologer that James and I worked with the second time, and then Drupada as well. They really have great wisdom and great intuition in the way that they practice. And remembering that it's about ultimately your own attunement with superconsciousness, with the divine, is the most important tool. So the title of Outwitting the Stars is really saying that if you nurture your spiritual life, you're fine without astrology. You shouldn't feel like you need it to navigate your life successfully. But if you're drawn to it, if you're intrigued by it and you feel like it might be helpful, it can be very illuminating and very supportive. So that was really what Yogananda brought in today in the first part of this chapter, that it's real, it is a science, and it's at the very least to be respectful of those laws, be respectful of the fact that the planets influence us. They do have an effect on us. And all of our yogic practices, they help us to stand in the greater reality. Once we've completely attained remembering who we are with self-realization, we transcend all influences of the planets because that we're aligned with the highest truth and the highest reality. But on our way there, we can utilize those tools and enjoy them. They can be it can be both entertaining and illuminating. Okay, great souls, wishing you many blessings on your journey. Great to be with you today.